If they're not attacking us, they must be here to help us, right? Attack is equivalent to intent being negative or positive. Not true at all. We have to up our intellectual game when it comes to thinking about contact with other forms of intelligent life. I worry that this conversation about the possibility of an alien threat seems to be inhibited. It's almost like it's taboo out of the gate. And, I hear this all the time. That's a fear-based response. We're projecting our human fear on the visitors. We need to be loving. We need to embrace openness. The universe is a place of vast consciousness and oneness. And here it is coming to us. We need to be open to it. Okay, that's one side. What about the other side? It's very possible that this force is a threat to us.
In the event that your encounters had become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
Personally, I'm not leaning towards these are benevolent, concerned, altruistic space visitors here to fix our planetary crisis. There is some transactional intent to gain something for their own benefit, to intervene and involve themselves in human affairs to some end.
Do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes. You're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave. And there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
They are differentiated beings from that of the human species. They're not like us. Like, we can agree on that, right? And so they likely have their own agenda. Even if it were not a destructive agenda, there's a super high likelihood it does not match our human agenda. They don't think like us. They're not warlike, but that doesn't mean they're here for a beneficial reason. Because they're not destroying us does not mean they're here to help us or that they don't want the planet. They may want the planet intact. They may want us with it. The infrastructure we built, the global civilization we've established that took, how many thousands, tens of thousands of years for the human species to get here, right? At this moment, they want possibly all of it. And so they're not going to destroy, they're not going to attack, they're not going to overtake. They're going to influence. If you don't want people to act, then prevent them from having the thought that would have impelled that action. And to prevent them from having that thought, prevent it first from arising and then from being strengthened or amplified through conversation or dialogue with others. I think it's important that this go from being framed as an aerospace military threat to being framed as a human species threat.
My next guest is Reed Summers. Reed Summers writes and speaks extensively on the UFO UAP issue and presents a comprehensive and logical framework for understanding contact and human evolution in a universe of intelligent life. His body of work sheds light on the activities and agenda of the alien visitation occurring in the world and what is increasingly acknowledged as an alien intervention into human affairs. Reed presents critical information that unravels the mystery of why these beings are here, their actions, and the overarching purpose that propels their involvement in our world. His insights offer both a nuanced perspective on the intricate dynamics at play and deeper insight into the profound questions surrounding our human species' interactions with other forms of intelligent life. Reed Summers is also a principal teacher of a curriculum for developing the greater capabilities of our human spiritual intelligence and applying these capabilities to meet the growing environmental, social, and political challenges we face, as well as to the frontiers of interaction between human beings and non-human extraterrestrial intelligence from beyond our world. Reed, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Clint. Great to be here.
You are one of the most important thinkers in this space right now, and I don't hear your perspective enough. And when I first discovered your work, I started to watch your videos, and this is going to sound silly, but I almost stood up from my chair and clapped because I was so excited to hear someone actually saying some of the things that you were saying. And they're very straightforward and in a way very common sense, but you have a very grounded perspective that goes beyond where we're at right now in this conversation. I think the average person is very dazzled and focused on the disclosure of technology and the getting our hands on the actual hardware and the technology that we seem to have in our possession from some of these non-human intelligences. But you take the conversation a step further, and I think this is very compelling because it seems that you are saying we need to be thinking less about the gadgets and more about the bigger presence, what they're doing here, why they're doing it, and most importantly, how we should be responding in this moment. I was hoping that you could start us out today by just kind of setting the table for us and giving us sort of some atmospherics on where we're at right now as you see it, what is happening, and how is this unfolding in your view?
Yeah, well, thank you, Clint. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm glad to have hit a home run right out of the park and got you out of the stands clapping. I think this is a seminal moment in the disclosure of government involvement and secrecy surrounding the possibility of contact with non-human intelligence. But I also think it's a tipping point regarding which way the conversation goes from here. Does it stay government fixated and focused? Do we plunge into the human controversies surrounding who has recovered these crashed vehicles, who has back engineered them, what technologies have they gained, who has the power, who frames the narrative, all of that? Or do we also, and in addition, turn our attention to the original purpose of disclosure itself, to the whole phenomenon of contact and the alien intent and their activity? My biggest concern right now is that we are really focusing on government, military, corporate involvements to the exclusion of the focus and inquiry related to the ET involvement in our world and the secrecy that they have promoted for over 80 years. And really, the secrecy that enshrouds the government secrecy could be said to be their secrecy. I mean, the whole deep state black budget reality and programs began after World War II and with the development of nuclear weapons, but concurrent with the arrival of non-human intelligence in the world. And some of the very first crashed vehicles that were likely recovered by the government at that time. And so the arrival of, I would say, ET has really initiated and fueled the secrecy in the human realm ever since their arrival. And so I think both are important: disclosure of government and military and corporate involvements, but also disclosure of the alien intent and their activity. And then really, these are two different kinds of disclosure needing two different approaches, needing two different sets of sources. But I think if we bring them together and if they meet halfway on the bridge, as an analogy, got to meet halfway, we can come to some sort of understanding and then an assessment about the visitation, and then possibly some framework or platform for public action, world action, just beyond the national security interests of this country. So I think it's a really important moment. The progress is welcome for those who have been in this field for a long, long time. But I think there are some risks as to getting our attention sucked down rabbit holes of novelty and opportunism and some of the more salacious claims around government involvement or possession of ET technology or biologics, for example. And we forget and lose sense of the larger picture of what this event really is for the human species, and start to think not so much as the native peoples being discovered, but really as sci-fi enthusiasts trying to grab at some sort of technological, silver bullet for the human, environmental crisis, for example, or many other crises we have in the world today. So I advocate that we start with a logical framework for understanding contact. We think like the natives of a world being discovered. Yes, we're unruly, we're chaotic, we're warlike, we're divided, but that doesn't mean we're not the natives and are not in possession or cannot lay claim to this world as our planet of origin. We absolutely can. And so we need to think like that. And I think the historical examples in human history offer us plenty of examples of what happens when we don't.
Some people have been saying of late that the presence of non-human intelligence may not necessarily be extraterrestrial. It could, in fact, be another advanced civilization that originated on Earth as well, that's older than ours. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been living and swimming in the sea of theories and possibilities and novelties in the UFO circle and community for so many years now. I absolutely have a response to that. Instead of saying no, that can't be. I think it can be. The possibilities are truly endless as to who these beings are, where they come from, and what we're stepping into as we emerge into a larger universe of life. So we can't constrain those possibilities right off the bat. But what we can do is map them out. I call it a spectrum of possibility. And on that spectrum, you could say from alien benevolence to alien aggression or alien salvation to alien invasion. There's a spectrum of possibilities. It's not black or white. It's not good ET, bad ET. It's many shades of gray. And then using what we know from present whistleblower accounts, evidence that's come out, the findings of ufology over 50 years, and then other sources like our understanding of nature, human history, things like that, we can come together with some sort of zone of probability. These are the most probable scenarios regarding who's visiting our world. And I think that's where we need to start. My concern is that interdimensional beings or ancient ancestors who are more native to this earth than us, those are very much outlying possibilities. They are on the far extreme edges of what's possible. Not to say they aren't, but I don't think that's a logical starting point or a responsible one, frankly. And this is where we toss out logic and the wonderment and the fascination and the novelty of contact, and also our own human aspirations for something bigger and better and a greener pasture, something not confined to this human space with all of its, perpetual crises. We have these aspirations. We need to account for that. Because if we don't, then we start to live on the far extremes of that spectrum of possibility, and we do not zone out the probabilities and begin to form what I would propose is a working conclusion as to who's in our world. Not to say it can't change. I think it will change. It must change. But we need some sort of conclusion built off of our assessment of probabilities and the evidence and the behavior of the visitors themselves. And then because with that, we can form an understanding that leads to action. And, in my experience, people love to dwell on the first question, what is happening? What is happening? And yet there are other questions to be asking, like, what does it mean? How do we prepare or act? What is it going to change at the level of human religion, governance, economies, everything? Those are ladder questions, but they rest on some sort of solid assessment. And that's really what I advocate. It's not to toss out this possibility and go with that one. It's to bound those possibilities into a probability that we can rest our hat on and begin to take action with.
You had a great document that I was reading this morning that you'd sent over, and it's on your website, called Myths, Misconceptions, and Logical Fallacies Regarding Alien Contact. And as I was reading through this, it seems like you have really gamed this out and thought through. It almost reads like if you were trying to figure out how to take over the planet, what kinds of things would you want to think about in a bullet pointed list? And as I was going through this, I was just really struck by it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of these items in this document and how that affects the conversation, because it seems like online the discussions that I've seen are very positive and overwhelmingly optimistic, but you take a completely different approach to thinking about this. Can you go into some more detail about that?
Yeah, definitely. So this document was my attempt to really outline this problem of human denial. When facing the unknown or the unexpected or something we just don't understand, there's that tendency to go into denial, to wall ourselves in with what we do know, possibly project our present understanding onto the unknown, and read into it what we need to read into it to allay our own insecurities. I think that's natural. But as human beings making contact with these unknown forces of immense technological capability, who have veiled themselves in tremendous secrecy, who have worked with not just our government in this country, but many government and non-government actors over 80 years in a very divisive way, it's imperative now that we go beyond those first initial responses and really kind of face up to reality itself. I mean, this is a reality check, probably the biggest for our human species ever. And so my attempt is to help people come to see what is it that's causing a preferential, rose-colored glasses look of contact. What is it we're trying to allay within ourselves? What are the problems in our world that we feel depressed or despondent regarding? And what are the things that allure us? For example, the possibility of alien technologies, free energy, all of these juicy nuggets that we think might just come our way.
Hmm.
And so, people kind of start to live inside of those novel possibilities, and they lose touch with their role as a responsible member of the human race. You may be one of the first, just like the native peoples in South America. So many accounts of a little boy ran to the edge of the water and saw a craft in the water with flags. And he ran back to the village to tell the elders, or, the village community. And he was scoffed at, he was scoffed at. And yet someone listened to him, and then they went over and looked at the ship. And so you and I, and some of us might be out on that frontier. We may be some of those first people looking at that ship, seeing that in the sky, making first contact, even in the intimacy of our own home. And so that's a massive event. I think we're privileged to be a part of it at that level. But I think there is a responsibility that comes with that, which is to kind of operate within most probable, bring in the evidence that we can, bound that probability further, tighten the circle or adjust the circle, and then take in more and adjust the circle further. It's a progressive approach, and not just leap to a hoped for conclusion or something that really represents our own emotional desperation or our own deep-seated religious beliefs or something like that. And I think those are all initial responses. That's fine, but it's really critical to go beyond them. There are some very common misconceptions and logical fallacies I run up against every day. It feels like I'm hitting my face on on concrete as I drive down this road all the time. And these are the walls that are put up in front of me. If they're not attacking us, they must be here to help us, right? Attack is equivalent to intent being negative or positive. Not true at all. Attack is not the only way to take something that you want from someone. If somebody doesn't come up and punch you, that means that they're your friend, presumably? No. So that's a common one. Another one that I've heard for years is if they wanted the world, they would have already come and taken it for themselves. And because they haven't made any sort of overt aggressive moves against us at a planetary level, then they must be here for some other beneficial intent. It's like, well, it's either black or white. If it's not black, then it must be white. But see, the spectrum has so many shades to it. And I think those shades need to be accounted for. And I've got a simple chart in front of me that I'm going to publish this week called the spectrum of possibility. And there's 6 shades of gray. And in the middle, right at that toss-up point, 50-50, are they here for a positive purpose, in our view, for our interests, or a negative one? Is this are they here for concern, or are they here for a transactional reason? Concern or transactional? And as you begin to look at the evidence that's coming in regarding their behavior, because again, how do you understand the intent of someone who will not disclose it? Well, first off, that's a flag, in my view, a concern. It puts the burden of proof on them a little bit more. If you're not going to tell me why you're here, standing at my door, and you want access to my home, okay, you got to explain a little bit more. So we have this kind of toss-up mini 50-50 spot on the spectrum of are they here for a genuine concern, but no certain agenda for their own ends? They're not, well, there might be a positive agenda or a collaborative agenda, but they're not here to take. They're not here for their own interests that are in opposition to ours. Or is it more transactional? And when you look at the evidence surrounding all of this, and I'm talking about the cover-ups, the secrecy, the lack of alien disclosure, the government military involvements, the transfer of technology, the deals that have been made outside public view, the military encounters, turning off, turning on our nuclear capabilities against our will and without our acknowledged permission. I mean, these flybys of civilian aircraft, which are hazardous at the least and alarming as well. And then, okay, that's just the aerospace, and that's just the military government side. Let's talk about the citizen side. So the abduction phenomenon, well researched, the consistency among reports, the sanity and the mental stability of those reporting it, studied for a long time. Great work doing that. And that's not it. I mean, human implants, animal mutilations. Okay, so now we're getting into the more dark and difficult part of the contact phenomenon. Take it all together, put it on the spectrum of possibility. And which way are you leaning on the fence? Personally, I'm not leaning towards these are benevolent, concerned, altruistic space visitors here to fix our planetary crisis. Instead, I'm leaning the other way. There is some transactional intent to gain something for their own benefit, to intervene and involve themselves in human affairs to some end. And I think we need to start to bound that even further. What is that end? What activities really demonstrate the intent or the end goal of that behavior? And so I think that's really important. Moving, if I may add just one more,
Sure.
here's a common one. The visitors, they must have transcended war and conflict in order to be technologically able to develop the science and the societal unity to travel in space, to get here and to do these amazing things that they do. Technological development equals spiritual development, ethical development, probably, we assume. Not true at all. I mean, look at our world. Are the technologically advanced also ethically and spiritually advanced?
Hmm.
Is it possible out of a destructive intent that is against the flow of life and against the beneficial needs of others to develop high technology and use it against others? My goodness, just look everywhere. Look in history, look in the present, open up the news. So this belief that, wow, if they can do that, if they can fly in our skies at that speed, if they can evade the military like that, then, well, what then? And I hear this and so all the time. I hear it all the time, which is, there's alien messages all around the world, purported channel communication saying that the human race is a virus on the earth, that we're destroying this beautiful gem. And this is where I listen for it. Here it comes, right? Like if someone came to your front door and said, you know what, you're doing a real poor job of being a homeowner, a father, a business owner, and you're listening to this like, okay, that's a little insulting. First off, who are you? Why are you at my front door? But then they ask for access to your home, or they think, you know what, let me live here. Let me take over your business. Let me be father of your family. I'll do it better than you. That's the kind of logical pit we are falling into with some of these myths and misconceptions. And it's very concerning to me.
It should be very concerning to everyone. And I'm shocked and stunned continuously about how few people talk about it. And in fact, I'm even suspicious about how much pushback there is online and certain online conversations you can find yourself in. It's almost unacceptable to bring up the threat narrative or the idea that this could be a risk. And I would point out to your point, to dovetail off of that, in Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, says that the best possible outcome really is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
Mm.
It's one of our oldest books on the subject, and one of the first points it makes is that if you can do it without fighting, that's the superior way. And in our own history, you're absolutely on the nose. We have, in warfare, when the Germans were the most advanced civilization on the planet, they were running concentration camps and gas chambers. When we were the most advanced civilizations, we dropped 2 atomic bombs on civilians, and it's been going on that way throughout history. And I don't see where, I've never heard the argument made in a compelling way that there is a point of technological development where we suddenly divorce ourselves from our violent tendencies and we just, or our imperial tendencies, and just go off and become self-actualized, wonderful beings that just enlighten everyone that we come into contact with. I've never heard that argument made convincingly, to me anyway. So I think it's really interesting that you're bringing these up.
Yeah. And, at these positions we take, these possibilities we entertain, is it likely true at a fundamental level? That's also a proof you could apply to any, possible explanation for the visitors. And so, right, when we become technologically capable and we go involve ourselves in the affairs of others, are we usually demonstrating an advancement of our inner life or our intent? No, it's just not true at a fundamental level. And so many of these arguments and refrains and walls they could put up, they don't stand at that level, nor do they stand up to the evidence we have either. Back to your point on Sun Tzu and the Art of War, there's a very possible sophisticated way to apply that, which is if you don't want people to act, then prevent them from having the thought that would have impelled that action. And to prevent them from having that thought, prevent it first from arising and then from being strengthened or amplified through conversation or dialogue with others. And this could be a masterful use of that law of war, which is why is it that so few are willing to have this even conversation about the possibility of a threat? It's almost like it's taboo out of the gate. It's like to be avoided with 12-foot pole. And I hear this all the time. That's a fear-based response. We're projecting our human fear on the visitors. We need to be loving. We need to embrace openness. The universe is a place of vast consciousness and oneness. And here it is coming to us. We need to be open to it. Okay, that's one side. What about the other side? What about the other side? It's very possible that this force is a threat to us, even if they didn't even intend to be a threat to us. I mean, because they are differentiated beings from that of the human species. They're not like us. Like, we can agree on that, right? And so they likely have their own agenda. Even if it were not a destructive agenda, there's a super high likelihood it does not match our human agenda. And so in negotiation, two parties work out their differing agendas and they come to some sort of compromise. That's not happened. There's been no effort to reach out to the human race and honor our current concerns and aspirations and values, engage with us at a more diplomatic or high level. The involvement is deep and penetrating and secretive and subversive. And so that's a massive flag right there. But I worry that this conversation about the possibility of an alien threat seems to be inhibited. And I'm not sure quite where that's coming from.
If they've been here for this long, at least 100 years, we could say, you can have another conversation about ancient aliens and ancient contact, and that's a valid conversation. But just within the last century, we know that they're here. We know that their technology is vastly superior. Why wouldn't they have a plan? Why wouldn't they be working towards some sort of goal? Why they're not just here to be like neutral observers for no reason. There has to be there. David Jacobs writes in his books that there's an infrastructure. There's something to support them. These ships don't just come out of nowhere. They're coming from somewhere. So I think it's really unnerving that people don't take that a position of caution, at least just caution. Certainly humanity hasn't gotten it right. I mean, we clearly are a race that needs to grow up quite a bit, but we're learning, and this is a process, and we're on our way. Assuming we don't wipe out the planet in the next 50 years, we're probably going to make it if we can just get through the next few decades. Another common thing I hear is that beings that have this kind of technology that are this advanced couldn't possibly want anything from us. What do we have to offer them? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, right. Well, we are dazzled by technology in our modern world, and it's a technological moment, and can't argue that. So I understand that. But when we see these craft doing what they do, the performance, you then assume, wow, well, they must be able to. I mean, if they can travel between stars or travel, God knows how many times a second faster than us, then they must be able to. They must. These are assumptions. They need to be seen as assumptions to be tested against reality. So we might assume that, well, if they can travel between stars or God knows across the galaxy, they don't need what we've got. They don't need petroleum. They don't need iron. They don't need gold. They don't need these, prosaic human, assets and resources. And I'm sure they don't need those three, but that's not to say that's the only thing we got over here. I think it's pretty clear. Earth-like worlds are rare in the universe. More rare than they are common, that's for sure. And the biology, the diversity, the environment and ecosystems we have here are, if rare, then possibly valuable. You have to just carry that right across logically to value. Rarity should be valuable. If there are terrestrial planets like ours with liquid water that can give rise organically to complex species, wow, that's something in a universe of gas and rock and very harsh environments. And so I think we need to challenge that assumption about, well, they can do what they can do, therefore they don't need anything from us. Not so, not true. The Earth is rare. The biology of this earth might be unique or novel. Maybe biology is the resource that's cherished out there. Maybe that's the substrate upon which food is grown or upon which other worlds are seeded with life. Who knows? And so, these logical fallacies are used. They're calling cards. They're put up on the wall to say, I didn't want to have this conversation, or I'm backing out, or don't want to see it as a threat. Sorry. And that's all they really are. They're not even very much arguments. They're refrains, they're cop outs. And so I think we need to just kind of brush that off the table. It's very possible this planet, the human species, is of value out there. And we need to entertain that possibility.
I would go a step further and say we must be of value because they're here. Something of value is here, or they wouldn't be here. Clearly.
Right. The investment. Look at the investment of time, energy, and like you called out from Jacob's work, the installations, the complex, chain of command that they seem to possess, and the vertical integration of whatever their supply chain is to be able to bring what they bring into the world and take things, organic matter, even people, out of the world. So it's like this is not a glancing blow off the human species. This is not like a little comet that or a meteorite that just glances off of the human world and says goodbye. Just want to stop in and sample a few things and taste the Coca-Cola and then hit the road. I mean, this is not like that. It's pervasive, it's deep, and it's longstanding. And so there's some programmatic goal here. And any program that's being operated on top of your or my program, our human program, that's not disclosed, wow, this is no longer a 50-50 likelihood of good ET, bad ET. We're on the 80-20. Mm-hmm. Until, again, I'm open to being shown otherwise, and I'm open to demonstrative evidence of a beneficial intent. But the burden is on the visitors. We're the vulnerable ones. Sure. We're the ones that know nothing about them. They, for all we know, have studied us for hundreds or even thousands of years. We don't know. Their capabilities are off the charts. They can interact with our spatial environments in ways that we certainly can, in terms of water, the upper atmosphere, space. And look at us. I mean, we're not a united world. We're a divided world of 170 plus countries, and we're a mess. We're a mess down here. And so we're vulnerable. I think this is a peak moment of vulnerability for the human species and of opportunity in terms of what we've been able to develop as solutions for our own problems. And, I go back to some rules of life here. I mean, if someone, young person, teenager, is struggling in their life, whatever, they're having mental issues, substance issues, we don't know. But you know of them and you're concerned. Would you go over to them and say, you're a virus and a scourge upon the earth. You're not doing well. You're destroying your life, your property, your parents, your family. You need to do what I tell you to do. Or you need to follow my program. Or I'm enlightened, or I've achieved what you can't, so do what I say. Follow me. Is that how life works? I mean, no, it's not. Every being is sovereign in a certain space, and the human race is sovereign in this current Earth space. And there are arguments out there, if we want to go further down the list, of how can we say that we're the natives of this world? Maybe they're more native than us. What a load of rubbish.
Come on. I'm going to need to see some receipts or something. Like maybe.
Nobody say that to me on Twitter.
Yeah.
For 24 hours, at least 24 hours.
I'm open to a lot. I think most people are pretty open-minded and are willing to entertain compelling evidence if the evidence was presented in an honest way. I think the problem is we just don't know what we don't know, and so we fill in the gaps with so much optimism and hope, and we want it to be just like the movies, and we want it to be this thing that comes in and just solves our problems. And you can see this in that conversation about, it's very common when they talk about nuclear weapons. Well, they turned off our nuclear weapons. Clearly, the message is don't kill each other. How about the message is we're displaying our power and we can shut off your most powerful weapons. They shut off our aircraft carriers. We now know this. They can turn off an entire aircraft carrier. The ultimate projection of power that our military can muster is a nuclear aircraft carrier. Arguably, the pinnacle of military technology, certainly for the last 100 or 75 years. And they can shut it off at will. And we're surrounded by these things. As far as we can tell, we're surrounded at all times by, we don't even know how many. They're cloaked, they're all around us. And we have reports from abductees. And I always find this interesting how quickly this conversation gets shot down. The abductee conversation is almost like it's a non-starter for so many people. But as David Jacobs points out, these are the people who have actually been inside these craft. And these are people who consistently, across continents, across social strata, across professions, all walks of life. John Mack has talked about this. These are people who are not crazy. They have no mental illness. They are saying what they believe, what they are saying they believe is real. And they're telling us about the interior of the craft, the motivations of the occupants, the infrastructure that supports the civilization. And what they have to say, more often than not, at least in my research, has been pretty terrifying. Even the people who seem to later on come to accept their experiences as a net positive. If it's 2:30 in the morning and I wake up and there are beings in my bedroom, I'm treating that the same way as if there were 3 dudes standing in my bedroom and my kid is asleep down the hall. I'm going to react in a less than positive way. And I don't understand how people just like let all this go. They're like, well, there's no there.
Well, there is something in our space that's disabling our first instinctual response, I think, as human beings, and is even deprecating that response to say that's fearful, that's lower order, that's low vibration, low frequency, man, all of this dribble of metaphysics, which I mean has its own importance to be considered, but not as a refrain or a way to disable your own like first instinctual response, which is, yeah, there's someone in my home. There's an intruder in the house, not a visitor. Visitors come because they're permitted to come. It's a temporary visitation, and we negotiate agendas. None of that has happened with this visitation, and that's why I don't think it is a visitation. I think it is an incursion or an intervention into our space. And okay, I don't think that's a big leap to think or even to entertain. And yet that most people that I talk to, at least in the UFO community, I will say I do talk to a lot of people outside that community, many of whom are very open to considering that as a possibility. Because why? In some ways, they may not have been touched by this concerted effort to demean the native people's traditions, institutions, spiritual and religious values, and supplant them with something from beyond. Something is disabling or disconnecting our first responses and instilling or installing in us another set of responses, which are not, necessarily wrong. Like, yes, turning off a nuclear weapon or carrier could be interpreted as a message of peace, but it could also be interpreted as a show of arms. And you must entertain both possibilities and then get to the bottom of which one you're going to go with. And that no one's going with the show of arms is like, wow, that's a flag. And so I do feel that our mental and psychic space is being affected both passively and intentionally by the visitors. We could go deeper into that, way deep into that. And this is part of how aggression, I think, this is what I'm coming to understand. This is because they're not destroying us, does not mean they're here to help us or that they don't want the planet. They may want the planet intact. They may want us with it. The infrastructure we've built, the global civilization we've established that took, how many thousands, tens of thousands of years for the human species to get here, right? At this moment, they want possibly all of it. And so they're not going to destroy. They're not going to attack. They're not going to overtake. They're going to influence and prevent us from even having the thoughts leading to conversations, leading to actions that would thwart their presence or resist it or just simply say no, and instill in us or install those kinds of beliefs that promote extraterrestrial visitation and the belief in salvation, whether it be technological salvation, a Christian narrative salvation, a metaphysical New Age narrative salvation. There are a lot of people who believe that the visitors are a fulfillment of those prophecies, even the technological one. I'm sorry, all you atheists and intellectuals out there. We are in love. We are in the church of technology, and it is claiming our authority on a daily basis by the device in our hand. And so don't think that we are above that tech at this moment of, AI and transgenics and editing the human genome and all of this. I mean, tech tech, this is another reason why this is a time of risk, is at this moment, human will and the submission to technological progress is an oscillation that's going right left over the fence all the time. And so what a thing for a visiting technologically powerful alien intelligence to come and say, oh, we can plug right into that. Oh, it's perfect. They have AI engines. Aha. They have global surveillance. Perfect. They can manipulate the thinking of the entire population or large amounts of it. Excellent. And so, I don't think that's a coincidence that those capabilities that we are now developing are erupting or opening up right as, someone else comes into our space. But I think also that this visiting force is using a much higher level of colonization strategy than we would ever imagine. And so this is where we have to up our intellectual game when it comes to thinking about contact with other forms of intelligent life. They don't think like us. They're not warlike, but that doesn't mean they're here for a beneficial reason. They may have just evolved or developed super advanced, hyper advanced tools, technologies that can influence the thought of their adversary in such a way that it almost appears there is no adversarial relationship. So I think this is the intellectual game that we're now in. And I really encourage people to step out of those logical fallacies and those kind of cheap, easy assumptions and refrains and start talking about the full spectrum and start bounding a zone of probabilities on that spectrum of alien intent. And then, I'm sorry, you're going to have to lay your hat on something eventually. I've laid my hat. I want to see others lay their hat. I want them to say, this is interdimensional. These are not physical beings. Say it. If you believe it, say it. But don't just pepper the internet and the psychic space of our world with novel possibilities. This. And I think you're right, Clint. We're filling in the spaces. We don't know so much. We don't even know what we don't know. And that's a risk. And so it just gets backfilled. It's like the dump truck comes and just backfills it with a lot of kind of garbage, banter, talking possibilities when, this is a species contact event. This is an event of science and nature. And I think it belongs at that level of dialogue.
I don't believe that the military industrial complex should have the monopoly on the contact with these beings. And it certainly seems like that's who's in charge right now, at least who's having this dialogue, to whatever extent the dialogue is happening. But I do think it's wise for us to have developed the technology to defend ourselves and to be able to operate to the degree that we can in the same space and environment as these beings, so that we can deal with them on somewhat of a better footing. I don't want to say equal footing. Do you have an opinion on the cover up in general? Do you think that there's some good stuff happening there, or is it all dark in your opinion and just military industrial complex after that dollar? What do you think's going on there?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm still learning. The jury's still out for me on what is behind this wave of disclosure. I think it's absolutely credible and good faith among some who are bringing out these pieces of evidence and this research and stuff that's been revealed. But I think we have to acknowledge and remember always that the public understanding of alien visitation has been managed and massaged and carefully crafted for decades by that, I call it the Gov Mil Corp establishment, military government corporations, because it's not just government, it's not just military, it's some other network, like a mycelial network under the forest floor that we can't really see and account for. We don't know what trees it taps into or where it goes.
That's
pretty amazing.
A great way to put it. I've never heard it put that way. That's excellent.
Well, they've had 80 years to develop it in almost complete secrecy, and they've had a lot of money and a lot of powerful tools to do so with. And they've had the visitors. And we don't know what the visitors have given them, what tech has been transferred, what deals have been made. The keys to your house may have already been handed over along with the deed. Not your house, but our house, the Earth, right? We don't know. And it could have been exchanged for trinkets from space. It could have been exchanged for some profitable, little piece of tech that, someone's going to get super rich, or one country's going to be the world hegemonic power as a result of that. Great. Good job. So Jury's still out for me on this wave of disclosure. I think it's absolutely important. I'm excited. I think millions and millions of people who have never been exposed to this, in addition, never been exposed to the misinformation regarding it, the overt misinformation, like the seeding of false narratives, false conspiracies, they're now coming into this space fresh and clean. And I have conversations with these people from time to time, and it's exciting. They're like, wow, so what do you know? I'm like, oh, well, I don't know everything, but here's some things I know. And here's a good starting point. And here's how I think we should start thinking to be adjusted, right? And they're receptive. And so I see, I'm very excited that the broader public, Main Street, can come into this, what used to be an alleyway, and load it up with new people with, intelligent thinking and grounded logic and thinking the first thoughts, not jumping to the 90th thought. Like, think the first thought and then have the second and third. Like, progress in your thinking versus abandon your thinking and just sign on for some narrative about ET salvation, for example. So I'm enthusiastic about it. I do feel that disclosure is a powerful tool, and it won't just be abandoned. I mean, you could say disclosure has been controlled the entire time. And so I think it's a major misnomer or poor word choice to call it disclosure, controlled disclosure, to promote that, when those who have been controlling it are still controlling it and will be, right? So, oops. I can think of about 5 better words. The deep state can give me a message. I'll reply. So I think disclosure is a powerful tool. It will be used by many different players for different purposes. And I think as this opens up, it's going to get a little messy and a little hazardous. I think the narrative will be shaped. It will be used as a weapon, a messaging weapon, a weapon to get populations behind their governments, to support conflict with other states, to sow seed distrust into other states. I can just imagine, when Russia, China, and the U.S. all try to claim the disclosure narrative to say, we're disclosing this. We're the ones who are bringing the truth out. The Chinese are working with them. No, the Russians are working. No, the American. It's going to get toxic. Mm-hmm. And see, this is the problem: is we're not ready for contact. There really is no ethical form of contact that can be happening right now, because to work with any government excludes the others. There is no united governing body with power to enforce its decisions. I'm sorry, UN. We're a mess. And we have massive, environmental and social political problems right now. But I believe we have the solutions for those problems. Absolutely, we do. And I'm not open to anyone knocking on my door saying I don't, or we don't. We do. And I think life works by people claiming their strength and finding their inner resources and bringing them to bear in a way that empowers them and their societies. That's how life gets better. Life doesn't get better by someone popping a pill in your mouth or saying, here, you live with me now, or you do what I say. I mean, this is not the way. So as disclosure rolls out, I think it will be used. I think it'll become a little treacherous. And that's why, again, I advocate this historically informed, nature-informed, science-informed, reason-informed approach framework to understand and approach building some sort of working conclusion around visitation, to back out, widen the frame, widen the lens, because it's going to get really narrow and tight in the years ahead as a bunch of people pile in on this and try to stake a claim. And so I think it's a powerful moment. It's an unpredictable moment. We don't know which way this is going to go. It's very possible, that part of the iceberg that's been under the water for almost 100 years doesn't come above the waterline. It stays below the waterline. It's possible. And with all that taken into account, I think, we have to disclose the alien intent. That's the event. That's the big event. And that, I think, has given rise to a lot of the other child events that have taken place as a result of it.
Do you think, though, that I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to jump in there real quick, do you think that they even know what the alien intent is?
Not necessarily. Absolutely not. I mean, if two powerful parties partner together to extract gains from one another, do they disclose their full thinking to one another? Doesn't happen in business. Mm-hmm. Do failed business relationships happen all the time? Yeah. So no, I mean, and again, I think we also need to obviously break down this kind of monolith called government. I mean, it's factions within, it's layers within factions, it's need to know basis. I mean, is there any single living, breathing human who knows the alien intent based on their involvement in any government or military program? Possibly not. Everyone, all of them might be misled. They might have been shown one small part of the program, um, and they formed some sort of understanding based on that, and it's not the full program. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we can lean on any one human being to tell us this is who they are fully. And so we're in the dark, and instead of filling in that dark space with the novelties and the possibilities and our fascination with this, which is real, it's not wrong, nothing wrong about that. I think we just need to build a framework, set a foundation for logical thought at really all levels of human discipline. I mean, sciences, health, governance, economy, everything. And begin to think like the natives of a world being discovered, because that's what we are. These are three-dimensional craft, probably guided by three-dimensional beings which have some sort of intent or agenda. And we need to know what that is so that we know how to negotiate this process on our own behalf.
I don't want to ask you to speculate too much because so much of what you're saying is grounded in common sense and just a framework for how to think about this. But I am curious about your thoughts. If the iceberg does reveal itself on that day when the world has its ontological moment and there's going to be a day and then there's going to be a day after. What do you see as the effects of this on our society and our culture? What kind of world do you see in the weeks and months following that moment?
Good questions.
If you had to speculate.
Big ones. Yeah, sure. I think it's a powerful moment and a good one. I'm not personally afraid of the wider world suddenly becoming aware that contact is happening. I think it's a powerful moment as a species. I think I am a little concerned about how it will be used and how it will be framed. And I'm concerned about the specter for human conflict. I mean, we can't agree on the climate crisis. We can't agree on who won the last US presidential election. We can't agree on a lot of other much lesser things. I don't expect us to agree on this one. And so our world is already bowing. Its back is bowing under the weight of our present conflicts and our irresolutions. So that's my concern, is that it becomes a force for division, a tool to be used. And I'm also extra concerned because the entity that we're imagining is going to fly over a major US city or land on the lawn or march down Main Street is a hyper intelligent force, hyper technologically capable. There's a lot of good indications that they are capable of mass neurological control, of controlling the thinking and emotions, and even the internal picturing visions within the brain of a human being. And so it's no guarantee that we will all see this the same way. We have our own ontological shock, right? I mean, like the natives who saw the tall ships out at sea, there's some accounts where they looked and they didn't even see them. Like it was so outside of their reality that there would be a ship with flags they didn't even perceive it in their field of vision. So, I mean, there's that. There's what we perceive as super subjective person to person, but then there's a force in our world that is capable of changing what we perceive, actually, literally. And that's unnerving. And so this is why I do think gradual or positive, constructive disclosure, this whole controlled disclosure thing, it's getting to me. Controlled or catastrophic, take your pick. Oh, I don't know. I guess I'll take control. I mean, there's got to be third, fourth, fifth options on that, right? And so I think we need some sort of gradual, slow ramp for public awareness. And I think we need to stay backed out and not use this as some sort of tool to win an election, to start a war, to tip the geopolitical balance. I don't have a whole lot of faith that we will. So it's going to become a fist fight. But if more and more people can just stay grounded within themselves and be logical thinking human beings, kind of like you and me right now, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're not trying to make massive claims or say we know everything or but we're just trying to stay kind of grounded within ourselves. And I mean, this segues into the spiritual work that I do and the curriculum that I teach, which teaches people how to stay grounded like that and to use not just their superficial sight and their superficial thought and intelligence, but deeper levels of sight and thought and intelligence to perceive an event that is almost so big. It's like the elephant in the room. You don't see an elephant. All you see is gray. Well, it's because you're 1 inch away, right? So to teach people to back away a little bit from this phenomenon and take that more species level view of it, I think we need some thousands, millions of people who are grounded in that as we go into this fray and into this wild storm, which is going to be probably disclosure or catastrophic disclosure at some level.
You just touched on something that I want to get into more detail on now, which is the mental environment. We know that the overwhelming consensus among contactees, experiencers, abductees, researchers, as far back as you want to go, the overwhelming consensus seems to be that NHI can operate and do operate in the mental realm using telepathy. And as you said, they have the ability to influence our thoughts, plant thoughts in your head, change the way that you remember things, put screen memories on top of real events, and basically, I have no better term for this, so forgive me, but manhandle us telepathically. I mean, we are defenseless, it seems, against this. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of this? And I'm also curious, do you yourself make a distinction between the spiritual realm and the mental realm with regard to telepathy, or are these just parts of the same continuum?
Okay, yeah, let's definitely dive into that. So, some of what I'll share with you is based on the Allies of Humanity briefings, which is a set of communications from an off-planet group of observers, neutral, extraterrestrial observers, who came to the vicinity of our world to report on this alien presence that is interacting with us and influencing us, and then tell us, specifically kind of what their program, their plan is, and how they're undertaking it. So some of this I did not come to on my own. I'm coming to via that set of revelations, which I think are high credibility and super solid at this point, and very much corroborated by what we can see and the behavior of the visitors themselves. So these allies of humanity, they talk about the mental environment, which is the environment of thought, emotion, in which force can be generated and aggregated and directed. And so you can imagine, like, if 10 people sit in a room and imagine hating someone or fearing something, that if you were to walk past that room, or you were that person, the object of their thought, you might actually feel something. It might affect you. This is the aggregation of thought as a force in the mental environment. What the Allies say, and what others have reported, abductees and other researchers through their contact with experiencers, is that these visitors possess unbelievable capabilities psychologically, meaning inside their own biology, but also technologically to interact with biology, which is the brain. Also, the mind is biology. It's the brain, and so they can affect people. They can create powerful responses in the neurology of people. And they can actually, to the point of actually being able to command a human being to do a specific act or function. So that level of ability. And so this is, I think, a reality, certainly a possibility. And it's possible, like, this is how it works out there in space. It's game up. It's like, yeah, it's next level. In terms of species interaction. It's not even just they sit down at the table and talk, like there's going to be some diplomatic event between the leaders of government and the ET visitors. That may be happening in the sleep cycle of government leaders. I mean, the ET visitors may be able to communicate thoughts into the minds of people passively without any way for them, that person, to see it happening, or even any piece of technology we have to measure or monitor that. So this is what you could call influence in the mental environment. And I think this is the whole new arena for the human species. We are super vulnerable, like you said, to being to being super subjective with our experience. So, like, if we feel anxious, or if we're terribly afraid of an event happening, or we suddenly, you know, have a thought that we're shameful about another person, something like that. It's all me. It's me. My mind, my brain, my stupid self created that. And again, I mean, the stupid self, right? This is a narrative that the ETs seem to be wanting to promote, which is human incompetence, human corruption, and basically just, you know, that we're like invalids within our own physical environment. The virus, the scourge on the earth, those are in these ET communications. So there's some effort to promote us to be discouraged in our own abilities, to internalize the thoughts and emotions we have as being entirely our own, which is, I don't think, true. I think we pick up a lot from the environment around us. We are fish swimming in that bigger psychic ocean. And the thoughts we think, the feelings we have, they do rise and fall. They grow and they shrink based upon certain swells and movements and currents within the psychic environment of the world, of just humans. This is without any ET visitation. So I do think people are swayed and moved in non-visual, non-five sense ways. And I think there's plenty of examples of that being used negatively in human history. And thinking, for example, of the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. I mean, there was a utilization, not just of propaganda, but of psychic manipulation. And regardless of how skillful they were at it, it was happening. I mean, those crowds, those rallies, that feeling that affected people. And it wasn't just them. And so I think that there's some indication that we live in this environment. Now we're making contact with a force that probably has an unbelievable level of skill to generate those thoughts, direct them, not just to individuals, but to whole populations. And the Allies of Humanity do talk about this. They also talk about how what they call the intervention, this alien visitation, has been basically establishing bases from which they can transmit influence in this mental environment onto large population centers off the coast of large coastal cities and mountains above large cities and things like that. So this is the level of the possible program. And, you know, if I can go back to the disclosure for a minute, I think it's important that before we just start banging on the government for every detail they've got and never stop banging, I think we need to understand what it is we're asking them to disclose here. I mean, they may know part of this program. They may know a lot about this program. They may not know the intent of the visitors, because again, that's in the head of another being that has a different psychology than you. It's differentiated from you. So you don't know what they're thinking, but they know the program. And the program might be very deep, very big and pervasive, very dark. There could be some effort to disclose that to the public because the program, the human involvement in the program is turning sour or is failing in some way, or there's been some sort of betrayal. I wouldn't be surprised if I don't think it'll come out, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's possible, that's true. And so we have to know what we're demanding here. We are demanding admission of human involvement in a program that probably had human permission to abduct X number of people from these 30 countries over this time period, that gave permission to access certain networks of data and information to affect human thinking and sway human populations. Human involvement that has accepted technologies that are massively treacherous and could be easily weaponized and may already have been. So it's big. And that's why I think, again, don't expect too much from the government. Don't bang too hard. And look for other sources. Look for other sources of disclosure. Because if you rely on what the Pentagon kicks out the door as scraps at the end of the day, you're not going to get what you thought you were going to get. You're not going to get disclosure of the alien phenomenon. I'll guarantee you that. You probably won't even get disclosure of the government involvement in that program. So more sources. I think admission is important. I don't know how far disclosure will go.
Perception management is such a part of everyday human affairs, and it's certainly a part of warfare throughout our history before we invade another country or do a large military operation. There's always weeks, months, or sometimes even years of preparation of the battlefield by saturating the enemy or the target with whatever information warfare you want them to be saturated with. And we
Right.
do this. We know that this is done, and we have very sophisticated ways of doing it ourselves. We're probably the best in the world at it right now. And I think it's interesting that people wouldn't automatically just assume that that's being done to us. And there's a great story. I'll have to find the clip. I've used it in a previous video, but it's of Bud Hopkins giving a presentation where he talks about he tells the story of an abductee he was working with, and she said that she was absolutely in the regression that they did. She was being subjected to some procedure that was terrifying and horrifying, and this being just touched her on the forehead, and she suddenly was overcome with this feeling of love and the deepest, warmest, most positive emotions. And Hopkins says she would sacrifice her own child for this being, because that's the kind of power that she was overcome with. And I think if they could do that at a distance, or if they could even do it to a smaller degree at a distance, then that's very dangerous. We have no way of understanding what that's like, or how to even know that we're under that attack, as you said.
And it's, I mean, this is already possible among humans. I mean, you can control the neurochemistry of an individual to have an emotional response, to have a felt reaction to something. And you have to have them in a lab with, something dripping into their blood veins, but it's possible. And it's not a large leap to think that another form of life has developed ways of affecting that change in the neurochemistry of a person remotely. You're so right. I mean, next level warfare. And so toss out this notion that if they're not attacking, if they're not taking, if they're not destroying, I mean, that's just not how it's done. Come on, they've evolved way beyond that. There are better ways to do things in the universe.
And
There
as
are
you
better ways.
said, if the biological diversity of this planet is what they're really after or interested in, which it seems like it is, we certainly are an oasis of
Mhm.
life in an otherwise barren part of space, as far as we can tell, anyway. Um, so
Yeah.
the biological diversity here is the thing. That's the jewel. We're not necessarily the center of this story. We're just a part of it. So maybe they
Right.
don't want us to, have a nuclear confrontation because it would reduce the biological diversity. They're not interested in whether or not we kill each other. They
Right.
could probably care less. As far as we know. Um, and I'm curious I'd like to ask you to speculate a little bit more on one other aspect of this, just because we're already kind of talking about it to a certain degree. Um, what are your thoughts on the abduction phenomena? It is a very hot potato, it seems, in most circles, and it is on the fringe, probably the fringe of the fringe within this topic.
Yeah.
What do you think about it? What do you think's going on there? And
Hmm.
how should we think about it?
Gosh, I remember a time, I was a lot younger. I was growing up. I was in my early teens when alien abduction was at the tip of this conversation. It was the tip of the phenomenon itself. And I'm so struck by how, at least in the UFO community, the discussion has gone from what alien is doing to what we're doing. And it's like, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Why did that happen? It's like, how did this become a human controversy story only? And for some only. They don't want to talk about what ET's doing. And so I remember a time when alien abduction and the accounts that people were bringing forward under aggression, but also other accounts where people did physically disappear and did physically reappear, were the tip of social dialogue on this possibility of contact. So anyway, something has seriously shifted the conversation off of that square. And it's a bit alarming that it is that fringe, that it's that way out there. How interesting. And going back to what you said about the psychic warfare, I just put this idea out there. I think it's very possible that a force like this alien visiting force is going to use that in ways against us, and would create a smokescreen of competing narratives, conspiracies that are half true, 50% untrue, 1090, and basically just confuse the space. So there's so many competing variations and understandings and evidence that's not evidence that people just give up. I think that's hyper intelligent. I think that's actually almost analog level. It's not even digital level psychic warfare. It's analog. That's what we could do to ourselves or to each other, and probably try to. So I think there has been an effort to seed the conversation with all these competing narratives and really obfuscate the clarity that would have otherwise been possible. And I see that clarity decline. I mean, people are just, even researchers, even people who've been in the field for years tell me at times, oh, an abduction researcher told me once, well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know why they're here. I don't even know if it's alien. It might even be government. Maybe they're interdimensional. Maybe it's an upgrade. And it's like, my God, you've interviewed abductees for years and you don't know anything. You haven't made any working conclusion as to what the phenomenon is behind it. Wow, that's a problem. So going back to what I think, or what I conjecture about abductions, I definitely think the abduction phenomenon is real. I think it's way more pervasive than we know, meaning more people are involved in it than we may ever uncover. And I think it is an effort to alter us at a genetic level and intrude or intervene, not just in our affairs, but then the thinking and the biology that makes those affairs, that makes those human decisions, that propels society itself. It's going further down the spectrum into more intelligent, more intelligent, more intelligent. Why not alter us genetically so that we think the way you want us to think? If they have any colonizing intent, if they ever want to be the overlords and not have to personally rule, 7, 8, 9 billion unruly humans, I would probably edit us at a deeper level if I were them, and alter us at the level of epigenetics, the level of how we express our basic genetic framework, so that we perform the way they want us to perform, possibly not perfectly, but with a high probability of doing so.
Like
That's
we do with dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
We do with dogs.
Right. You want a dog of this size, this nature, temperament, that barks less? Well, make one.
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait around for nature to do it, through random genetic selection, just make one. So I think these are intelligent beings. I think they're going to do what's intelligent. I think we should presume that they're acting on the highest level of the intelligence curve that we can imagine, and also acknowledge that the curve goes beyond what we can imagine. And I think that's an important starting point. So back to abductions, I think this is an intrusion into our genetic integrity. I think it represents the longest of long games. This is how long they think. They don't just come here and in 100 years, flip the narrative and take what they came for. These beings, we don't know how long they live. We don't know how they plan. The time horizon that they operate on. It could be 1,000 years. I think it's probably shorter than that, given this evolutionary moment and how it's really only in the last 50, 100, maybe 120 years that we've seen this technological ascent. I think that's to be taken advantage of in their view. And so I don't think they'll take 1,000 years to do it. But I think the findings of abduction researchers corroborate this narrative of not just a transactional intent on that spectrum of possibility, but something that represents an incursion, an intervention, maybe a long-term silent colonization effort underway. It could turn out to be less threatening than that. It could turn out to be more threatening than that. Absolutely, it could. But I think that's that zone of probability there.
Do you think there is anything to the claims that some have made about a hybrid breeding program, some means of creating a separate but almost identical, indistinguishable race?
Oh, well, let's just go further on the up the slope of intelligence on that curve. Let's get off the long tail and go up the curve. Don't just edit the human race to be one thing, to be one kind of cow. Edit us to be, different kinds that do different things, perform different functions. This thing of rule by proxy that human colonizers have done forever, which is, you don't want to set yourself up as the overlord to be the object of people's anger and attack and rebellion ultimately. You want to set up a proxy, a native human representative or government or class of beings that perform the way you want them to perform, that may possess the capabilities that you, the visitors, have, for example, in this realm of neurological control, but that humans would see as being totally human and would be very difficult to discern them as not human, possibly impossible. I don't know. But yes, I think there is an effort to create a human being that can perform the functions that this visiting force needs performed over time. And governance is most certainly one of those functions. Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry if that's
that's heavy.
that's the dark stuff. And going back to the Allies of Humanity briefings, take it or leave it, but they present a very compelling case for a hybridization program to create a human alien hybrid leadership that has the capabilities of the visitors, but that looks, walks, and talks like the rest of us, and that yet will outperform us on many benchmarks, certainly intellectually, such that they will naturally, through selection, rise to the top of industry, governance, the corporate world. And I don't personally conjecture as to anyone in those positions now representing that. I know some people like to. They like to call out the aliens among us, by name. I don't get into that because I can't personally verify that suspicion if I had one. And B, the more you get into the fringe, the more you lose touch with the rest of human awareness. And I think there's a calling right now for people, especially those who have been in this field for a long time or who know what they know, to get down to the second, third, fourth, fifth question beyond what is happening. What must we do? What must I do? What part do I have to play? I'm a member of the race. I'm one of the first ones to see the tall ship out in the cove. Do I need to run back to the village and tell someone? Am I the Paul Revere? Ask yourself that question. This is a moment of calling. This is consequential. This is survival. And therefore, people need to step up and take their part in contributing to a better outcome for the human race. If we just stay in the background, watch YouTube, discuss possibilities, and just stay disengaged from the larger human, the mainstream, we're not going to play that function. And the mainstream will go on where it goes without our contribution. And so I really encourage people to think seriously if this has their name on it, this issue. I think for some people it does. And you could be feeling a lot more empowered and purposeful and even healthier in your life if you get about doing something with it versus just living in the echo chambers that many of which have been manufactured within it.
I think that's a great point because with regard to disclosure in this moment, it seems like we can almost touch it. It's something that we can interact with. We can watch our politicians on YouTube. We can send them an email. We can call their office, and it's within arm's reach to a certain degree. What you're talking about, though, seems to be a little bit harder to get one's hands around. And other than just talking about it openly and asking these questions about, is this a threat and should we be thinking about it in that way? What are some specific things that people can do right here and now that are actionable today?
Yeah, great questions. I think there's really action at the collective level, and then there's action at the individual, personal level. I think there's some very compelling collective action needed. I know it's very controversial to talk about it, and maybe that conversation hasn't even started yet. I would love to start it though, which is, what do we need to do to secure our physical and psychological space as a human race? We need borders to space. We must be able to track craft in our solar system, and start to even think about creating some sort of shield, some preventative barrier that preserves some operating sphere and space around the human race. We cannot have things just flying into our atmosphere and plunging into the ocean. Done. No tracking, no monitoring, no accounting, no disclosure. Wow. And if anyone's listening who's involved in working with that program, do not think at all, ever, that you can manage that phenomenon in the background and in secret for the benefit of this human race. You cannot. You are being outgunned and outgamed, I guarantee you. So there needs to be disclosure, absolutely. And see that, along with that logical framework and that working conclusion, that can start to open up the conversation about, okay, wake up time. We need to do something to protect this world. We need to protect our borders to space. We need to limit, contain, or at least do a quality check on the transmissions that we are sending out into space, all of which could be picked up, watched, discerned, and have probably been. And that's probably why we are so well understood by those visiting. They have run 60 years of radio and broadcast transmissions through their own AI machine, and they can ask their own chat GPT exactly what human beings want for dinner, exactly how human beings can be affected neurologically. Probably. They may have that technology. I wouldn't be surprised. So we've basically proffered all of our data, all of our sovereign data out into space to anyone who wants to go grab it and then analyze and understand us to the T better than we do. So if you're scared about AI, I would recommend being a little bit more scared about the other AI, which is alien intelligence. That's the more dangerous intelligence than anything artificial that we can create. And then there's the artificial intelligence that they create. So I think that needs to have our chiefest concern. So we need to have these kinds of conversations about how to protect our collective space, simply so that we can maintain sovereign psychology, sovereign freedom of movement, sovereign affairs between countries, peoples, without it being influenced or manipulated from an outside force. So that's the collective track. On the individual track, I think there's a lot of great stuff people can do. I've advocated awareness, becoming aware of the phenomena, and many more people are becoming aware. And then from that, I think it's important to take into account other perspectives, such as what we can glean from human history, because, the human race is the only intelligent species we've ever been able to analyze. And we have a massive record of its behavior and interaction. And so that's some sort of something upon which to base an understanding about intelligent species interaction. There is behavioral science, and we can, cone that out to take in the possibilities of other behaviorals or behavioring of other intelligences. And it's not to say that they're going to act like us or that the human experience constrains the galactic experience. None of that. It's that's a starting point, and we iterate from there. But if you don't have a starting point, good luck iterating anywhere. And so I think, for the individual, awareness, a logical starting point, some sort of understanding of what's most probable and what's least probable, and not to hold them up as a 50-50, because I really do not think good, bad, negative, benefit, it's not 50-50. It really isn't.
Well, to go back to something, I'm sorry to cut you off, but to just something that you said earlier, they've had all of this time to destroy us if they wanted to. They've also had all this time to help us if they've wanted to. And I certainly haven't seen any evidence of that.
Right. Look at the trajectory of the climate crisis over the last 70 years. Look at post-World War II, human affairs. They could have helped us then. 60s, 70s, 80s, nuclear proliferation.
If they were so concerned about atomic bombs, why not stop the two that we dropped on civilians? Right. Start there. Yeah. Turn those off.
Very good point. That's look to the negative. There's the photographic positive. Look to the negative. It also contains information. So it's a very good point. So with a logical starting point, some framework for differentiating between possibility and probability, I think people can come to some sort of working understanding for themselves. And with that, you begin to have your ontological moment, or you maybe already have had it. You begin to confront what this means at the level of your own personal religious views, sense of identity, sense of purpose in life. What am I doing? And does this play into your personal affairs, your career choice? Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. I mean, you remember the human race, and people pick careers based on a sense of many things: responsibility, duty, calling to serve others. And here's a new way to serve. Not many people staffing this station in the hospital of humanity, but we need some nurses and doctors over here, like I think, or we're gonna need. And so I think it is a question: am I connected to this at the level of purpose? Not everyone is. And so you stay more in the awareness realm. You become aware. You support logical conversation, grounded conversation about it. You support the disclosure effort. You listen to those who have had contact or experience of visitation, and don't denigrate them. Don't disparage them. These people have borne the brunt of what contact actually is. I think it's important that this go from being framed as an aerospace military threat to being framed as a human species threat. and the people who have been taken against their will or who have had intrusion into their personal lives, who have even been taken and not returned, by the way, because not everyone who is taken is returned. I mean, man, they have borne the brunt of what this is. They need to be respected and heard. So that's something that just about anybody can do. And then, what another thing anybody can do is look, we are the human species, you members, me, like we are the humans. Let's not like give the authority of that or the empowerment of that away to the government or the military and give them the power, which is unfortunately a lot of the dynamic of disclosure is giving power away. It's to say they have it. They have what we need. Without what they disclose, we can't know anything. It's like, man, talk about being nobody with nothing to do except bang on the iron door. I mean, wow. No, we do have something we can do. We are the human beings that are being visited. And so I think, this carries into all aspects of our individual human life. We need to up our game as human beings. We're species to species interacting now. And so even if not physically, mentally, psychologically, the level of communication in the mental environment. And so we need to become stronger, more capable, more mentally strong species, members of the species. And I think that will equip us, who knows, down the road to make some form of physical contact if that ever happens, to play our part in this equation. So we need to up our game as a species. And I think that's an individual call to action. That's not at the level of philosophy or politics or the universities are going to do that. No, that's you and me. That's everyone. And so I think this is a powerful event in the life of an individual person. Changes everything. And I'm excited to kind of help people through what that means and give them maybe a framework or some sort of path to integrating this awareness and to becoming a human being of this century, this millennium, this moment when we are the ones, we are the generations alive today who are going through this now. And I think to integrate that and to be it is important. It's a part of this. And there's a lot more that people can do. We can dive. I'm sure there's more. There's other conversations to have.
I absolutely would love to have you on again and continue this conversation because I think it is so critical. And to your point, we do have our own set of problems internally that we have to work out. Clearly, the cover up has been problematic, and we don't know the motivations of our own people who are involved in the cover up or what their actions are. And I think from the perspective of someone engaging in the conversation about disclosure, we need to be asking. We need disclosure. Yes, we need our government to come clean about what at least is going on to their knowledge, but we need to be asking deeper questions and probing further and asking how are we using this to create a posture to respond to this. And I agree with what you're saying 100% on an individual level. Just by having these conversations and expanding the dialogue and asking these questions, it just broadens the conversation in a healthy way. Where can people go to learn more? Where would you point them to find resources to help them on their journey to a better understanding of all this?
Yeah. Well, I definitely encourage people to look at the work of certain researchers who have gone into the dark side of this phenomenon, because it's a part of the phenomenon. I'm sorry, we can't cherry pick through this and say, oh, I just want to look at this part, not the other part. It's one thing. So the work of David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, Carla Turner, these important people who have made a contribution. The work of Richard Dolan, chronicling the history of U.S. primarily, I think military interaction with the visitors. I think it's all really important stuff. And so there's some education and learning to do there. Go into the history of human colonization. See how that went. I think it's a powerful analogy, not to be thrown out. There's no refrain that can just toss that out of the court of the jury, of what's happening. And then I do think there are certain high credibility communications from beyond the world that might represent some sort of whistleblower act, some observational force that has also been watching us, that might be on another part of the spectrum of possibilities, not in the transactional intervening, but in the concern. Because, man, if there is some sort of intervention colonization at work here, I'm sure anyone else watching who would not have that intention would be alarmed. They might have some sort of prerogative to help us understand that event or warn us about it. And the Allies of Humanity briefings represent that, in my view. I think they are an example of that. And so we don't know. We don't know. We cannot track these craft outside our atmosphere into space. We don't know how affairs work in space. We don't even know who's out there. It's like we live in a neighborhood and we're just stepping out of the front door, or we're just exploring the backyard. We don't even know who our neighbor is. We don't know who the guy standing on the corner is. We don't know what that car that just went by is. We know nothing. And so it is possible that some observing force would fill us in on those gaps. And if they did, I think we should accept that. At least bring it into the hopper and take it into consideration, see if it's corroborated by what we can observe and all the other factors of nature, history, common sense. It has to. I don't think any alien communication can be adopted if it contravenes what we can glean from our own experience being here on the earth itself, and our own common sense and our own native instinctual response as well. So I definitely don't put anything above that. And then for those who feel super called, to go into that deeper, I recommend the work of my father, Marshall Summers. And he has spent almost 40 years teaching this comprehensive preparation for contact and a theology and a frame of intellectual framework for understanding these ontological changes that we're about to go through at the level of spirituality and religion, for example. So my father's received a massive body of work on this, and he's been teaching it for many years. And so if you feel like you're someone who needs to prepare for this specifically, or like I was saying, it has your name on it, it's a calling, it's calling to you, then I definitely recommend going and reading what my father's been teaching for so many years and the pathway of preparation that he presents.
Your father, Marshall V. N. Summers, I have, for those who are watching who don't know, I've read some of his work and I've watched some of his videos, and I think sometimes people tend to get off the bus when you start talking about channeling, and they're like, I just don't know how I can believe something that someone is channeling. But I think it's really important, as you said, to look at the content of the message and not focus so much on where it's coming from, because it's so relatable and it's so real and raw and honest, and it's very hard to read it or listen to it and not go, yeah, this is common sense. This is really common sense. And I think that's just really important for people to know and understand as they go into this and explore it more. It's very clearly delivered in a very straightforward, matter of fact way.
Yeah. If I may also add to that, because I think it might be up in the minds of some listeners, telepathic communication may be how communication works. I mean, to bridge space-time and be able to speak over vast distance non-technologically is a capability that may exist, and it may be how aliens do things. So again, it's up on that curve of the more intelligent, high-power approach to life that's possible out there. The other thing is there are so many communications from purported alien beings with messages, warnings, things like that. And one thing I like to share with people is also a way of approaching those and vetting them and coming to some sort of clarity about what you can and cannot trust. And there are 3 variables I can just throw out there that I find very helpful in weeding through these purported alien messages. Some of which could be true. Some of which could be true and the message false. The intent is, deceptive, and some of which could be absolute, someone's mind talking to itself. So there needs to be some way of approaching these. But these 3 variables are: is it observable? Their message, meaning are they presenting something that you can observe and that is corroborated by what is happening in your space? I feel the Allies does check that box. I mean, it's their message is basically, look at what's happening. The abduction phenomenon, human implants, meddling with government secret deals, technological transfer. I mean, it's like, okay, you kind of know that it's happening. The second box to check is, where does the power go? So if the message is, you are loved and you are one with the universe, and but you are so corrupt and incapable that we need to quarantine your planet. And now we're in charge of addressing when that quarantine ends. And we're going to play that, it's like, wow, okay, talk about taking the power out of us. So anyone who comes over to you and says, your power's mine, you should just basically tell them off. No, that's not how life works. It's just not how life works. Sorry. And then the third box to tick is, what is the action that they're proposing? I mean, there can be a message warning us of nuclear disaster, the need to redeem our climate crisis. It can sound beautiful, right? It can sound super enlightened. And what's the ask, right? Anyone can come up to anyone and say anything well worded, but what's their ask? And I think that's a critical box to look at. And for me, the allies check all three of those boxes, and the power stays with us. We are the native peoples that need to get our act together. We have the tools to do so. That's what the allies say. We don't need any contact with any form of life to do that. That's what the allies say. It's like, wow, you're going to come all the way here and tell me that we don't have to take anything you offer? We don't have to buy into any galactic agreement or join your federation? Okay. And then what would we do? And what the allies say to do is like grounded in common sense, psychological truth that we know about ourselves, about how human beings function and perform well. And it does make sense. And it is inherently just the right thing to do. So you can only corroborate that, as you read the allies briefings, but those three boxes: is it observable? Who gets the power? And what is the call to action? I think those are the three that you need to hold up against any purported alien message.
Reed Summers, it's been an honor to have this conversation. Thank you so much for spending the time with me this afternoon. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has as well. And I would love to have you back on to explore this further. It's the tip of a very large iceberg, and there's so much more to talk about. We just barely scratched the surface, but thank you again for being here, and let's do this again.
Definitely, Clint. Enjoyed it. Thank you.